right there. Perfect. Okay, everyone. We're all set. I'm finally set. I hope you're set. So, let's get some context on what this is and why I did it and all that jazz. So there's a lot of complaints about Overwatch right now, and they're like, we gotta change this, we gotta change that. And a lot of people, I feel like they're just not following some basic rules, and they're really just trying to, like, screw over one role to fix another. That's what they're really doing. And I'm just like, guys, the problem in Overwatch is really about the core design. Most of these numbers that they're changing doesn't really matter. Even if they change 1 or 2 heroes, they could rework something and it wouldn't really matter. They could add in bans, doesn't matter. You have to address the problem, don't address the symptoms. And so what I did is I kind of just started, sit back, looked at the numbers, looked at other things, just watched Overwatch League level games. Just I'm like, all right, what are the common themes that we're seeing here, and what are the stuff I've blogged about before, want to blog in the future, and how can I tie a lot of these ideas together and bring it all, boom, right here. So this is what we're going to do. So, title of this is Tracing Our Steps Back, Understanding Overwatch's Core Problems and How to Address Them. And let me bring the mic a little closer so that everyone can hear my super soothing voice. That I know you guys love. So, also, for those people that are going to watch this on YouTube, and for the people I'm talking with here, I'm now going to show you the length of this post. And people are like, why did it take a month, Chro? Look, we got a lot to talk about. I think my viewership is probably going to drop by like 50% after I did that. Night Ranger, I will address your question at the end. Please hold your questions to the end of the stream. I'll be happy to answer them at that point in time. Yeah, buckle up, folks. This isn't my PhD. This is just like normal, just talking about stuff. I don't know. It's me. So, tracing our steps back, understanding Overwatch's core problems and how to address them. Let's start. All right. I even call it out first sentence. I'm just like, this discussion is going to require a bit of setup. And this first sentence, or not this first sentence, but this first paragraph will literally say exactly what I'm going to do throughout this whole thing. So if anyone's like, oh, I don't care about your pre-points or where you're coming from, I just want to see what your suggestions are, go down to the bottom. They'll be there. So this is going to take a bit of setup to talk about what I believe is wrong with Overwatch. I will have to step all the way back to the fundamental ideas Blizzard based this game off of. While Blizzard has not shown or talked about these values, we can get a good guess based on their design and balanced philosophy. Once established, we can discuss their current roles in Overwatch, how the fundamental ideas shape them, and how they compare to the popular roles across other game genres. This will set us up to finally discuss the issues we're seeing in today's version of Overwatch. Finally, at that point, we can properly discuss the direction we want Overwatch to go towards. This will leave us in an open-ended state on how to accomplish these changes. Again, I'm not Blizzard, so I don't know what their exact method is for design, but the method I'm going to show you here will be similar to the concept that Jeff Kaplan talks about when he asks players to vent on how the game makes them feel rather than giving them balance changes. So, Jeff has said this a couple times, and he's like, I don't want you guys to tell me what to change. Like, don't go to him and be like, Echo doesn't deserve headshots. It's more like he wants you to say, Echo makes me feel pinned down. She's always in the air. She's always moving. She always has a way to put damage on me. That's high in damage. I don't have any options. And he's like, okay, let's address those then. And this is kind of like, this is basically how you kind of walk through that process mentally. So, let's first look at the key themes I believe Overwatch was created on, and we'll take these main talking points. Take these as main talking points when trying to get a game funded by a company. So, like when they pitched Overwatch to the CEOs and whatnot, I assumed this is what they were trying to pitch them as to get funding, because a lot of your fundamental ideas is basically how big your player base is going to be, what market you're trying to hit, all that type of stuff. So, by far, number one, the biggest theme in Overwatch, which I blogged about first blog post like 4 years ago, accessibility. This is Overwatch. This is what Overwatch is all about. This is what a lot of new Blizzard games are going to be about. By far the strongest driving factor in Overwatch is accessibility, which we've covered in a previous post. Again, this is the first post I wrote on this back in November 4th, 2017. What accessibility means is that players from all skill levels and all genres can come together and pick up the game. FPS games are notorious for being a tough genre to get into, let alone to only have competitive play. Blizzard needed to focus on accessibility to allow as many players into the game as possible. Not only does targeting all levels make for a better game by designing it to be easy to learn, hard to master, it also leads it to be more profitable by hitting a larger market. It's no coincidence that Overwatch's main tagline is "The world needs more heroes," as a metaphor to get different types of people for playing a competitive FPS. We're facing a large boom in the gaming industry in respect to new players, and Blizzard hit the nail on the head with Overwatch. You could say that their design is following the current trends of gaming that I talked about in my last post. The way they accomplish this is through our next point, simplicity. So, we've talked about on the trend of gaming and how it just basically is... It's not that it's getting easier, but it is getting a little bit simpler, and that's because more people are getting into gaming. They want to hit wider markets, and it just makes more money. And it doesn't mean it's a worse game in most cases. But yeah, accessibility. And I guess I didn't really talk about accessibility too much, but things in Overwatch are really intuitive and they're simple and they get picked up. You can pick them up quite easily. So simplicity is another thing about Overwatch. Overwatch is designed to be simple, and while many developers want a wider market for their game, few actually execute on this. Notice how there are no items, no skill builds, skill trees, leveling system, or any of that to worry about. This is all by design, which we've discussed before. By streamlining the game, they've tuned heroes into items or playstyles, and in so have removed the need for items, currency, and experience during the game. This is how Blizzard can quickly onboard players into a game that can only be played competitively. Because if we compare this to a MOBA or anything else, like you have levels, you got to learn about like 60 different items, you got to learn about money, you got to learn how to get the money, how to get the experience. This is a lot of shit to be like, oh, this game's accessible after you finish like 10 hours of play, 20 hours of play. In Overwatch, you pick it up, you have all your tools, they're very intuitive, very simple, and they're just right there and you can use them right away. They add accessibility to this through hero design that caters to all skill levels, and now you have a game that can quickly get new blood in from a vast array of markets. Very few mechanics in Overwatch need explaining. Health is simple, and the only two major distinctions are shields and armor. One regens and the other takes less damage. That's Overwatch damage system in a nutshell. Unlike Warcraft 3, which you need a 5x6 matrix. People think I'm fucking around. I am not. This is how damage is calculated in Warcraft 3. You have normal, pierce, siege, magic, chaos, spells, and hero damage. On top of that, you have light, medium, heavy, fortified, hero, and unarmored armor types. There is, what did I say? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 by... Yeah, this is actually smaller than it needs to be. It's a very ridiculous matrix that you have to understand how the damage is dealt in that game. Not in Overwatch, right? We have a damage, and maybe it gets mitigated, or maybe they heal from it. That's it. Pretty simple. All of this drives a common element for all great games. Easy to pick up, but hard to master. Mastery requires player engagement, which they do through our next theme, player impact. So you can't have people master a game that they're not willing to play. That's all there is to it. If it takes time to understand it and play it and do it well, then there needs to be a reason for them to play it in the long term. Like, that's all there is to it. So how do they do that? Player impact. Player impact. All players should feel that they have an impact on the game or have the chance to. While accessibility and simplicity can get players in and onboarded quickly, they need players to feel like they're accomplishing something to keep them playing. Player impact, in my opinion, goes hand in hand with players having fun. And that's a very simple way to put it. Without feeling or seeing the impact or their impact, players will be much less open to playing the game in the long term. This is where Blizzard did things right. They use abilities that are strong to be tied to cooldown, thus allowing them to be balanced but still have a visible effect on the game. Cooldowns give a reason why something can be strong but still fair. In a way, it builds hope that these abilities can be followed up on with FPS mechanics to accomplish something more. I think of it as abilities more easily open the possibility of success, so that if a player loses, they think to themselves, if I almost had it, if I only did blank. This helps player feedback in a way that makes them keep playing and try to overcome what they almost just accomplished. For better or for worse, the queue system tries to make you have a 50% win rate, so 50% of the time this can work. Now, if the habits this builds are good or not is another discussion, but for player engagement, it's great. Player impact is really, really important, and you'll notice that with a lot of abilities, they do something visible. Like, you can feel it. Like, oh, I did that. Immortality Field, Sleep Dart, Bionic Grenade, basically any support ability. The Stun, the Whiplash, like, it is a visible effect. But almost every ability in Overwatch is like this. And if this ability was on, like, a 1 second cooldown, almost every ability would be overpowered. So it's locked behind a cooldown, which makes it balanced. So now players can be like, oh, I helped. You saw me help. So they can feel part of the game. They felt like they did something, but then to really follow up on it, like they're strong, but they're not overpoweringly strong. So it's like, oh, now I got to follow up with this with good mechanics. So it gives that little taste to your tongue where you're just like, oh, I did something good, and we still lost, but like I really did something good, and if I did a couple things more right, I could have done that. And then you hit Q again, and bam, you're trying that new thing again. And again, like I said, 50% win rate. There's a good chance that if you're trying to do something new and win and follow up on an ability, you're going to have success sooner or later. You're going to be like, yes, I won, and I'm getting better. This keeps people in the game. It keeps them playing, and it keeps them striving for more. I've been playing Junkrat for 4 fucking years, guys. I can still be better. The system works. Teamwork. I'm a bit reluctant to put this on the main theme, as it's more of a way to play the game rather than how the game works. But the truth of it is that at the start of Overwatch, heroes were designed to be played with a specific weakness in mind and have teammates make up for. I believe hero design is shifting slightly away from this, and while I lack a source, I do remember an AMA or a stream where Jeff and Geoff mentioned that it was tricky for the development team to move hero design away from teamwork and more into individual performance. So again, teamwork is more like a way to play the game rather than how the game works. But because hero design and balanced choices have been made in such a vast array that the game is essentially based on it. Yeah, I mean, also with role queue, it is now more inherent that teamwork is there. So to me, these are the 4 primary things in Overwatch. I think of these as the grand strategy of the game, while anything else would be sub-themes, which I would consider the tactics of the game. Some of these sub-themes would be use of counterpicking or promoting community values like a low amount of control. These are more about how the game is played rather than how the game is designed, which is why I won't focus on them too much, but know that they do direct the game's design a bit. So control is a really good thing. I wouldn't say that's a main value of it, but no one wants to get stunned more or lose control. So, while it didn't affect the core design of Overwatch, it's definitely affecting some of our decisions going forward, but not pronounced. So, I decided to mention that just because I thought. And I'll say an interesting part about these themes is that it shows the steps I believe all developers should go through to understand their own game better. Don't even assume people will play your game. List a set of reasons why they will and how you'll accommodate players from different markets. Now that they're playing your game, how will they learn to play it, and how will you keep them playing? Any game would benefit from from these stepping stones prior to sinking real development time into a title. I think that's just good game design knowledge, or advice, I should say. When you make a game, don't just think players are gonna play it. It's fucking good, guys. Why wouldn't they play it? No, actually, give a reason. Set some things up. Be like, oh, well, this is targeting the RTS genre. It's high in lore. I think I'm going to get a lot of people that like stories and this type of stuff, but still want some micro ability and feel like action-y. Lay those out and be like, well, how am I going to onboard these players? Oh, now that they're playing my game, why would they play it longer? Am I going to release DLC? Am I just going to, is going to be, a roguelike where it's just, constantly spawning different dungeons and whatnot? Why are people keep playing? It's a good thing to do. So now, let's get to the clickbait title. What is Overwatch's problem? It's an FPS! That's it. Good night. You can contact me tomorrow. I've enlightened you guys, it's an FPS. That's the problem. To be clear, it's the expectations that come from an FPS. Primarily, it's the idea that in an FPS, you need to deal damage to be impactful. This has led all heroes being designed to deal significant damage while still attempting to adhere to a role-based design. No small amount of hero tweaks and balances will ever change this fundamental concept, which leads us to what I would consider the crux. In Overwatch, you only have 2 heroes that can heal, 2 heroes that can tank, but 6 heroes that can deal considerable damage. This forces tanks and supports to be designed to have abilities that can deal with an entire team's worth of damage. How else can 2 supports heal 6 sources of damage? How can tanks have enough shields and health to live through the same 6 sources of damage? If there's any semblance of balance, they can't. They can't be, because non-damage based roles are overkitted. This is the problem Blizzard has willingly chose to solve, and has been overall fairly successful. Now, to understand their design better, let's walk through the traditional holy trinity of roles in modern gaming, support, damage, and tank, and then discuss how Blizzard attempted to change this in order to make it work in an FPS. I know it's really weird to be like, it's an FPS and that's its problem, but everyone can deal damage in Overwatch, and we'll be talking about this a bit in this post. You have to stop lying to yourself and say, oh, Moira doesn't do burst damage. I understand her damage is low, but if you looked at any game ever, and a support can take out a carry in 4 seconds, or 4 instances of their basic attack, that support deals burst damage, right? There's no arguing it. I understand, like, yes, 4 seconds can be a long time in Overwatch, but if a support, a healer in Dota, just 4-shot a carry or a tank player, I guess at this point we're going to say a carry, I'd be like, I think that support does a little bit too much damage, because they're 4-shotting a carry hero. So now we're going to talk about the tanks, or the tank role in the in gaming world, mainly MOBAs and MMOs I'm focusing on, and then how does that compare to Overwatch? So tanks are traditionally damage sponges and attention getters. Their main point is to deal low, consistent damage while keeping the enemy attacking them through abilities. In PvE, these abilities are simple things that generate immunity and force enemies to attack them. In PvP, tanks will often force attention on them by being a threat with abilities. These abilities often are on a low cooldown that focus on control or damage mitigation, allowing them to slow, stun, or stun their enemies, and often, if not dealt with. The biggest single core component to tanking is that tanks must be a threat in some way. Tanks that have no ability to threaten cannot properly tank by design, as they would be ignored. At first, it seems like tanks could be overpowered as they can survive and control, but traditionally, most tanks don't have a good source of damage. This means if you run into them alone, it's more of a stalemate or a trade of resources, which often favors the tank, over a longer period of time. It's when other roles are together with them that they really start to shine. And I think that's just... I know a lot of us play a lot of different games, so you don't really need to talk about what tanks do, but I like setting this up. And it's really good to understand where something comes from and verbalize it so you can correct it. In Overwatch, this couldn't be farther from the truth. To adhere to the rules we've established, tanks have to deal damage. In the worst case, Winston does 60 DPS in an AoE. While most people don't believe this is burst damage, you have to remember that this is 30% of an average hero's health pool in 1 second. You won't see that type of damage come out from a tank's regular attack in any other game. In the best case, you can have heroes like Zarya and D.Va that boast 170 or 147 respective DPS that eclipse most damage heroes. Not only is this damage high, but it's also fairly consistent, as tanks have lower range but easier execution to balance it. On top of that, they have massive health pools, damage mitigation, and abilities that control the enemy. In comparison to any other game, tanks are absolutely broken in Overwatch. Within Overwatch, tanks do have some semblance of balance, so I'll give credit to Blizzard as they have been able to balance them in some clever ways, which are model size, effective range, conditional burst damage, and balance for competing demands. Think of these balancing points as knobs that can be tuned up and down to reach a finer point of balance. I think people, they play tank and they understand how it feels, and they're like, this class is not overpowered, but when you write it on paper, if there was any MMO that had tanks that did the same damage as DPS, you would just run tanks. There'd be no reason to run anything else. Same thing in MOBAs. If you don't have a front liner, like you are pretty rough. But if all your front liners did the same damage as a carry, then why the fuck would you play a carry? Sound familiar? Sounds like goats, right? So while in MOBAs and MMO, model size doesn't matter too much, size is a unique balancing point in FPS games, as larger targets are easier to hit by enemies and allies, healing alike. It also introduces a unique balancing point within the FPS genre, as weapons with a larger spread can be more effective against tanks and less effective against other roles. I try not to accept model size as simply an increase of average damage taken. I think of it as a dartboard. If you increase the bullseye by 10%, you're not going to get a 10% increase of bullseyes. Because everyone is aiming towards the center, the chance to hit goes up significantly at first and then slowly drops. I believe the best part about model size is that it's incredibly simple to understand and understood instantly as a mechanic. So, a lot of people are like, oh, well, the model's 50% bigger, we'll just give him 50% more health. It doesn't work like that. If everyone's shooting towards the center of something, and I make that center twice as big, well, it's going to be more than twice the amount of people that can hit it, right? Because that's just kind of how averages work, at least when people are aiming for something. We're not just talking about a random part on the dartboard. We're talking about the part everyone's trying to aim at. And when something hits that, it does full damage. It doesn't do half damage. And it's not going to be mitigated by lowering the odds of hitting it, because everyone's aiming towards the center. More importantly, as everyone gets better, more people will hit the center more often. So, I don't like it, especially like in Apex, there's the two big boys, Gibraltar and Caustic, have a fortified buff where they take 15% less damage for having like 100% higher, bigger hitbox. The actual balancing point behind that is that they don't get slowed down when they get shot like every other hero in Apex. That's the kicker. So they can stay mobile, and it's the mobility that actually lowers their percent chance of getting hit, rather than just a flat damage amount. Next up is effective range, which could be the most obvious form of balance. Tanks in Overwatch are limited to 15 to 20 meters by either weapon range or ability range. Outside of this range, they can do little except use damage mitigation abilities or disengage. The problem with range is that while damage and support heroes are viable outside this range, most of Overwatch is played within 30 meters. 30 meters is the width of Numbani's 0.1 control point. So if you're shooting from the left side balcony to the right side where all the supports are always sitting, that's 30 meters. And most Overwatch is played within that type of distance. With a base speed of 5 meters, tanks can close in on their target in a couple seconds. This is the basis of the GOATS composition we saw a few years back. The balancing factor with range is that it's combined with low mobility or mobility on cooldown. This forces the tanks to commit to defending a specific area or removes the ability to deal with a drastic change in environments, such as high ground. The next balancing point is conditional burst damage. It's a new and brilliant aspect of tanks in Overwatch. It's the best example of player impact in the game. While most tanks on average deal less than a damage hero, when conditions are met, they often deal the same, if not more. I believe this is to give tanks the sense of strength, excitement, and timing in waves instead of the damage design of always doing something. So by that I mean, like, as abilities come off and on cooldown, and as they regain their shield and all that stuff comes back, you'll notice that tanks kind of engage and then disengage, and engage and disengage. Well, DPS heroes are just like, get in there, keep damage on them, engage all the time. Examples of a conditional burst damage would be Reinhardt and Winston's Cleave. While they deal less than 100 DPS for a single target, their DPS multiplies by the amount of enemies they hit. Often they can hit 2 or 3 targets, putting their damage over most damage heroes. Other examples are Zarya with High Charge, Roadhog and Successful Hook, or D.Va's Full Onslaught. I would consider Winston's and Roadhog's ultimate as conditional burst damage as well, because environmental kills are a form of conditional damage. All these situations happen from time to time and allow players to some semblance of carrying the game. This concept is really interesting, and if a tank player remembers any of their games, it's going to be the ones where they leverage this mechanic the most. It gives all other players in the game something to work around that's not fully predictable. By this, I mean, like, conditional burst damage happens like at the will of the tank, but things have to be in the right setting or right scenario for them to actually do this. So you're not like, oh, watch out, that Reinhardt's going to hit all 6 of us when you're not grouped up. What happens usually is when a fight breaks out, things happen, and then all of a sudden, for a second, everyone's grouped together, and he hits one hit that does like 500 DPS. So it's really hard to predict some of these. It is predictable, but it's a little bit harder to predict them. The added benefit of trying all of these situations to abilities is that you can modify the cooldown of a strong ability to make it seem balanced, which also contributes to the tank's timing that happens in waves. This is a key concept to tank balance. So conditional burst damage, the truth is tank players are not going to fucking remember if they hold a shield up the entire game and they did a really good job blocking all the damage. No one's going to wake up tomorrow, and I understand that is an important aspect of tanks, and I'm sure with Overwatch League level players, they'll do it, and they're like, this guy really is really good with the shield, and it really makes an impact. But for like 80% of the player base, they're not going to give a damn if they're really good at blocking damage. What they're going to remember is that Reinhardt charge that saved the game. They're going to remember like the Winston knockback where you got like 6 environmental kills. All these, they're going to remember a really good hook on a Pharah or a Mercy, stuff like that. They're going to remember Zarya and just owning with Zarya, getting a high charge, killing people, and then ulting and killing the rest. Like that's what they're going to remember. And that's why like I link conditional burst damage to player impact, because it's very visible. When someone gets hooked, they literally get fucking yanked across the screen. There's nothing more visual than that. And knowing, oh, I fucked up, and the guy that threw the hook's like, I got you, buddy. It's very visceral. It's really good for player impact to be that visible, because then people like, it's like in a building game where you start doing better and better, and your buildings look different, and the city looks different as you get better. If you played Skyrim, and if you did all the Thieves Guild quests, how the Thieves Guild literally becomes nicer. You start getting more amenities, you start getting all these other things, and you're like, oh, I did this. Like, I can see my hard work paying off. I really like that. So this conditional burst damage is really important, and support, we'll get into a little bit later, but support has the same type deal going. One point to understand is that outside of conditional burst damage, a tank's damage is high and consistent. By high, I mean within the context of Reinhardt does 85 damage a swing. That's, what is that? You cut that in half. That's like 42.5% of a character's health pool, of an average character's health pool. If a tank takes out half of a character's health pool in one swing, I consider that high damage. I understand for Overwatch it's not high. Conceptually, it's high. And all of tanks' damage is consistent. Right? Not to shit on tanks, but like, Winston, not very hard to hit. Same with Reinhardt. Hammer, cleave, Winston, cleave. Zarya has a pretty forgiving beam. Hammond actually, he actually requires a little bit more, but still, it's a machine gun. He has bloom, so it's more on the intensive side. Roadhog, shotgun, whatever. It's pretty consistent. It's close to the amount of healing done by support heroes. This creates a dynamic that outside of conditional burst damage, tanks will lose to a damage support duo more often than not. And I think this is a very important point. If a Winston's attacking you and a support is constantly healing you, the Winston has little to no chance to kill you. Reinhardt, a little bit higher. Zarya, if she's max charge, pretty good chance to kill you, but if not, then you have a good chance of killing her. And a lot of tanks are this way. If you're getting supported, you're going to live, you're probably going to kill him. A DPS and a support will very often beat a tank unless under specific conditional burst damage conditions. Last concept for balancing is for balancing for competing demands. What this means is tanks need to properly weigh what they want to do. If they choose one, they cannot choose the other. Most tanks follow this design, Reinhardt being the best example. He's either attacking or he's defending. He cannot do both at the same time. Dive takes, Winston, D.Va, and Hammond, and damage is Hog, Zarya. Tanks have this by having to commit their bodies more and are far more reliant on cooldowns. So with dive tanks, cooldown based, right? They can attack and defend at the same time, but they use their cooldowns, they use their stuff, they go over there, they do it, and they're stuck there, right? They have to sit there for 5-8 seconds, and then they can run. They're pretty committed. Hog and Zarya, they lack mobility, so while they have abilities that are pretty good, they have to be like, I'm going to engage here. and if like you have two forces that attack different sides, Zarya and Hog have no chance of dealing with both. Well, Winston and the other ones could, but they have to pick where they use their abilities, right? Essentially, there's a give and take. This forces them to choose to engage or disengage for a period of time. They do not have the ability to change their minds once an ability is used. This leaves the controversial heroes left, Orisa and Sigma, which can do either at any time, but are notably lacking conditional burst damage like other tanks. Now, some may say Rock into normal attack is conditional burst damage, and Halt in just normal shots. But I really don't consider that too much. Like, I understand it's under a condition and it's locked behind a cooldown, but it's under most scenarios, it's just not reliable enough for me to consider it part of that. And at least if you do consider it conditional burst damage, I wouldn't say it's as strong as the other tanks. And so that's what they kind of lose for being able to do attacking and defending at the same time. So that's kind of the talk. So now let's go to supports. Let's look at supports work traditionally. In MOBAs and MMOs, supports normally provide low damage at range, but often have abilities that heal, buff, debuff, or control their enemies and allies. It's important to note that while most do, not all supports have healing. This can be offset by items and natural regen that's natural to other games, but not applicable in Overwatch. In MOBAs, you'll often see a little less healing and more control or save abilities that allow them to mitigate damage briefly to a teammate. In MMOs, supports are more focused on healing, but their healing is more deliberate and slower paced. Don't expect to get full healed from 1 HP in a couple seconds like in Overwatch. Now we take a look at Overwatch support design. Again, all heroes need to do damage, so support sure do their fair share of damage, with Moira having the lowest DPS in Overwatch at 50 DPS, which is still 25% of an average hero's HP each second. On the healing front, supports typically heal in single massive quantities or in a lower passive AoE. Lastly, each support brings some utility to the game. The utility varies across the board, but it should be noted that both their healing and utility can win fights. While model size is not a huge balancing point among support, it should be noted that they are some of the smallest models in the game. Healing is done two ways in Overwatch: high single target or low AoE. Here again, we run into the issue of all healings dealing damage, as low AoE healing isn't viable unless there is some condition for that hero to do some burst heal. If they had no burst heal, then the massive single target damage in Overwatch would kill an ally instantly. The way Blizzard balanced this is that each AoE healer has another ability that allows them to burst heal, but lock down behind a cooldown. This allows AoE supports to compete with single target healers when focus fire starts to happen, but fall short if this damage is persistent. This gives more varied design with supports while still being viable. While AoE healing is a sore point for some community members, it's important to remember accessibility. Overwatch is about bringing more players into the support role, so more actiony methods that don't have to focus solely on healing are needed. I know everyone hates AoE healing, I get it, but if I played support, dude, fuck playing Mercy. I'm not playing any of those shit support heroes. I don't care how good they are. I probably would play, I like my Ana, right? I like my Baptiste, but again, I play them, heavier on the damage. And basically, players that want a more actiony or more damage type support, they can pick these AoE healers where they don't have to focus on healing. And that's important to bring different players into Overwatch, right? Some people just don't want to do that shit. Some people will support, they're like, I'll play support, but I'm going to play it my way. And now they have heroes that can, emphasize that. While healing alone doesn't diversify supports, the utility they bring to the game does. And by that, I mean, healing is pretty much the same across the board. Either they do AoE or they do single target massive. Yeah, there's Baptiste, which is little less single target, but AoE a little bit higher. Stuff like that. But it's a projectile, so it's slower. So there's a little bit of variance in there, but there's those two main methods and some in the middle. Which means there's not a lot of diversity when it comes to just purely healing. But with utility, there is. Utility is the support's conditional damage and player impact type mechanic. Each hero brings something unique to the field that helps their team immensely to the point that it can win a game for a team. Examples of utility are Immortality Field, Sleep Dart, Movement Speed, so Lucio, straight up more damage, so Mercy and Zen, and Control, so Brig. Utility is typically locked behind abilities making it less about execution and more about decision making and cooldowns. Utility is needed, just like Tank's conditional burst damage, as it provides a brief moment of excitement that is noticeable and visible to everyone that this player did something great. Identical to Tank's, this is what support players will remember. Rarely will support players remember a game where they constantly healed really well. Identical to Tank's. If you just healed people all game, you're not going to really remember that game. Now, if a Genji got nano boosted, goes to, kill your entire team and you slept dart him, you're going to fucking remember that. Right? Same thing with Brig. If you stunned and hit him and you pushed him off the map or you saved your team, that is what you're going to remember. Yeah, so it's immortality field. These are all really good examples of things that happen that it's essentially utility, but when you do it right, it feels so good and it makes you want to play more. So again, player impact, this is what supports it. Very important. This is important for later on because when we talk about what should we change, obviously the stuff that makes people play more and makes them feel good about playing the game, we're not going to touch, or you shouldn't touch that. The subtle part about supports is how well they deal damage. If you take the damage of a support hero without factoring in reload time, their average DPS is actually quite low when compared to all other heroes. All supports are easily within the bottom quarter of damage in Overwatch, but if you look at their damage with reload, you'll notice their damage spikes up in comparison. This means supports are slightly better at sustained damage rather than burst damage, giving them some uniqueness to the damage roll. So while damage, we didn't go over that yet, but damage roll, they just do damage all the time. And it's usually like pretty high, and then some are burst focused, obviously. But supports, like, their sustained damage actually is, and I can show you right here. I'll zoom in a little bit. I can't zoom in. Shit. Google. Why can't I zoom in? But basically, okay, here we go. Good. So you'll see the hero on the left side, the roll, the DPS they perform with reloading and DPS without reloading. And you'll see, like, the 13th strongest hero is Baptiste. Zenyatta's down here. Where are all the other supports? Pretty far down here. But if we do DPS without reloading, so just kind of like a burst damage, what they can use right away, you'll see Baptiste and Zenyatta, they dropped to 24, 25, and basically the bottom ones over here didn't do anything at all. It's really interesting when I started looking at the DPSs with reload, because here are the big losers, I would say. So depending on reload and without reload, Doomfist has the biggest difference of 133 DPS. If you just talk about him shooting his 4 shots, he does 200 DPS, which is quite high. That's actually remarkably high. But if you add in reload, it actually is terrible. And in fact, another funny case is Ashe. Ashe's average damage with reload is 74. It's identical to Mercy's Blaster. Which is, I found hilarious. Because her reload animations are so rough. But this just goes to show you that, like, when we talk about Junkrat, and people are like, oh, Junkrat's DPS is super high, look. If we talk about his DPS without reload, Junkrat's number 6. He's a good shield buster. But then you're like, well, what about with reload? Okay, well, Junkrat's number 9, and he's within 16 damage to the rest of the cast. Pretty much. So it's like, oh, Baptiste break shield is good of him, so does Echo, so does Torb. Oh, that's Mouse too, but Orisa does, Pharah does. Like, 20 damage isn't really that much as far as DPS is concerned. Over, 10 seconds, you do 200 more damage, which is a shot. Not a big deal. But back to this. We still need to understand that supports do significant damage. While Ana only does 70 damage per shot, if combined with any support, they can kill a damage hero within a second. Even outside of specifically targeting a 200-point hero, adding an extra 100 damage in a second adds up against tanks. In Overwatch, less damage does not mean low damage. So this is kind of reiterating the point that I talked about before. yeah, some things do less damage, but it doesn't mean they do low damage. 80 DPS is still significant when added with another hero that is 80 DPS, because then you start killing 200 hit point heroes in just over a second. So, damage. The damage roll. Where to start? It feels like the most active and has the most feedback, as when something dies, you know it was you that did it. The game always feels like it's in your hands, and that you have the tools to do what is necessary to win it. I believe these are the core reasons that it's the most popular role across all genres. There's no bullshitting about this. Damage in MMOs most popular. Carries and other damage heroes in MOBAs the most popular. Damage in Overwatch the most popular, as we know. Damage is popular. It's what people find fun. Traditionally speaking, the damage role only has to worry about dealing as much damage as possible to the target, which goes hand in hand with surviving longer, right? If you're dead, you can't deal damage. Focus on surviving. MMOs have slightly changed their damage role design by allowing the damage class to heal to provide more solo ability. This was changed when MOBAs started to become more casual and needed to step back on teamwork. This still hasn't changed the fact that they are the best source of damage in the game. In MOBAs, damage or carry heroes are designed to start slow but have abilities and mechanics that allow them to scale higher than anyone else eventually. In the same fashion, MOBAs have lifesteal items and other things to help survivability and the solo ability of the damage role. In either melee or ranged form, the role is still about killing things as fast as possible. Basically, what this is kind of showing is, while damage people, you do require a team. In MMOs and MOBAs, there is a point where you don't. Maybe not so much in MMOs, but in MOBAs, a carry can start destroying people by himself. He can just destroy an entire team. I'm just thinking, I'm having flashbacks to Phantom Lancer and Terrorblade, stuff like that, where it's like one guy with lifesteal and illusions can just destroy everyone. In Overwatch, the damage role is by far the most popular, and it's not because it has the most heroes available. When people say this, I get so pissed off because they're dumb. They're like, well, of course more people want to play damage heroes. There's more heroes to pick. Bitch, I pick one hero, alright? And it's in the damage role. Alright? And I guarantee there's thousands of us. Tens and 20,000s of us. You know why? Because I have a Discord and half the people there just play Junkrat. Alright? So, it has nothing to do with the fact that there's more heroes to pick in that one. It's the fact that damage is fun. It's an FPS, and the majority of people pick the game up. They want to shoot something until it's dead. It's also the easiest role to pick up when you're coming from another game. The defining characteristics of the damage role. This is so goddamn important, guys, and please, write this down. It's going to be on the test next week. The defining characteristic of the damage role is not specifically damage, as heroes in other roles outperform a majority of the damage cast. The actual uniqueness is freedom of movement and long-range damage. One key design feature missing is that most damage heroes in Overwatch do not have any self-sufficient abilities. While rare when these heroes do have self-sufficient abilities, it is to balance their niche design. Other balance points for the role are mobility, damage type, damage range, consistency, hitbox, and in some cases, utility. So anyone that's saying, well, Chro, no, DPSers always do the most damage. I just want to highlight, in the top 16, a quarter of the top damage tanks. If we talk about with reload, D.Va, Zarya do more damage than Junkrat. Roadhog does as much damage as Junkrat. Orisa, a little bit less than Junkrat. These heroes do a shit ton of damage. And if we look at it without reload, which is basically kind of burst damage, we start seeing them drop a little bit. Roadhog and Zarya are still up there. D.Va drops a little bit more, so does Orisa. So they're a little bit less on burst damage, but it's still burst damage because we're not looking at the whole picture, right? 176 DPS is fucking a lot. 170 damage from Zarya a second is massive. And it doesn't matter if we go down to, Orisa here at 133 damage a second. You're still dying in 0.2 seconds faster or slower than the other heroes. An incredibly funny thing, and we'll talk about this a little bit later. Sigma is one of the worst damage dealers in the game, DPS-wise. And what does everyone complain about him? He does too much damage. Yeah. Burst, though, he still does 73 damage burst. He hits you twice. And that's his DPS is 73. It's 110 per shot. But it still takes, what is it, 1.5 is his fire rate? So it's slow. Where are we at? Wiki design, facer. Yeah. Okay. So the most obvious design balancing point is a damaged hero's damage type and range. By damage type, I specifically mean projectile or hit scan. Projectiles are inherently less consistent than hit scan, but in most cases do not lose damage based on distance, which we call falloff. Projectiles are also larger in size, allowing them to be more accurate, but the nature of projectiles is that if they're seen ahead of time, they can be easily dodged. A funny note is that this means projectiles are best shot at an enemy that is not aware of them, which would explain a lot why a lot of players get annoyed at projectile-based heroes. Everyone hates projectile-based heroes because they're like, it's spam, they got lucky. But if I'm shooting at you and you're not paying attention, why is that my fault? Like, it's not. Like, I played to my hero's strengths. I attacked you when you weren't looking. I have a slower projectile weapon, which you can dodge, but you can't dodge it if you don't see it. So I have a pretty good chance of hitting you. Which is why people get annoyed about it. But the truth is like, that's by design. Like, you can't be upset at projectiles, because that's inherent to all projectiles in any game ever. Hit scan having an instant travel time makes them significantly more consistent, but suffers from falloff damage. With falloff damage, there are 2 minimum damage ranges depending on the weapon. Most long-range heroes' damage will drop to 50%, while all other hit scan will drop to 70% less damage at max range. So it's like Soldier, Widow, Ashe, I believe Baptiste is in there, Bastion's actually in there as well. Like, these heroes, max range, they still do 50% damage. Something like Sombra, Tracer, Wrecking Ball, these heroes go down to 70% minimum damage, or 30% max damage at range. Clearly, hit scans are the most effective before their damage falloff starts, but offer opportunities to still deal some damage outside of it. Right? They're not hard locked down on their ranges, and I think that's really important. They need some versatility, and they need to be a threat. Maybe not like a threat, but they still need to be able to do something at longer distances. The main goal is to have similar types of weapons, but used differently because of damage falloff. A good example of this is McCree and Ashe. Both have strong mid-range damage, but McCree's damage starts to lower at 20 meters, while Ashe's starts at 30. Giving her the ability to be a better sniper in long-range situations, while McCree has a fire rate advantage that's more useful closer range. Simple stuff, but that's just explaining it. Where Overwatch greatly differs from other games is that in an FPS, consistency is required for most actions. Not to belittle the execution in MOBAs and MMOs, because they do have some skill shots, but it's not every interaction like in Overwatch. And there's just no arguing that the FPS genre, you have to click and point and everything has to be accurate. You do get that in MOBAs and MMOs, but it's a lot less. This creates a bit of a problem when it comes to damage, as the 2 notable ways to deal damage is either sustained or burst. Sustained damage happens over a longer period of time and is more consistent. By its definition, it is lower damage. This is because if it was high consistent damage, it would just be considered our next damage type, burst. Burst damage is high damage that happens over a short period of time and is usually less consistent. Nearly all cases of burst damage in Overwatch are based on the hero's primary weapons. This is because of consistency and balance. A high damage ability, which are inherently easier to land, wouldn't feel fair. High damage needs to be gated by consistency, and that's through difficulty or condition, i.e. range. As if they happen too often or too easily, nothing else would be played. This is where we have a bit of a paradox with the Blizzard developers. Jeff Kaplan stated that he doesn't like changing the game for the sake of changing it. But as players get better, these burst damage abilities balanced around low consistency start to happen more. True to Jeff's word, this has yet to be addressed in Overwatch. Rarely do these high-skill heroes get balanced because players have pushed the hero out of scope from what it was originally designed for. The truth is, these heroes must be balanced constantly for the ever-practicing community. This is exactly why we're in the current why we're currently in an era where burst damage is consistent damage. Both lower damage and lower consistency heroes, even if it's burst, are no longer needed. This is Overwatch's problem right now. Like this is one of the biggest things, because lower consistency like burst damage would be considered headshots. They are lower consistent than body shots, but people got really good at headshots, right? And now this burst damage that used to be gated by low chance because of skill is now a high chance because of skill, and that's where we start getting a lot of issues. While tanks and supports have their player impact locked behind abilities, damage heroes have theirs locked behind their primary fire. It's everything else in their kit that supports this. Even characters like Doomfist, guys, I know everyone wants to say Doomfist, but look, take Doomfist's primary fire away, he's not going to get any picks. This is because damage is locked behind an ability, it inherently becomes less skillful as abilities have larger hitboxes and cooldowns. This will create situations where some heroes feel unfair to die to, or, on the flip side, become too dependent on cooldowns. In either situation, it's neither fun for the player nor the target. A lot of things, when people were developing Dota heroes back in the day, they'd be like, oh, don't rate me on the numbers, rate me on the design. And I'm like, no, your numbers suck, downvote. Why I would do that is because if I gave you an ability that allows you to target any hero and kills them, is there any cooldown that you can give that ability to make it feel fair? Or balanced? No, there isn't. So it's not about the numbers. It's about the premise of the ability. And if you scale this down to where something did a lot of damage but was on a higher cooldown, even if it didn't one-shot people, it would still be annoying. Like if Junkrat's concussive mines were 180 damage, but on a 20-second cooldown, people would fucking hate it, right? They would. Now the unique mechanic of damage heroes in Overwatch. Mobility. Mobility for damage heroes works in two primary ways. The first is that it helps keep damage heroes... The first is that it helps damage heroes navigate maps to always find a way to keep their damage on their target. And secondly, it helps them survive so they can keep outputting their damage. In the first case, movement abilities can help heroes get into their effective range, such as Doomfist, Reaper, Genji, Ashe, and Widowmaker. These close-range heroes have movement abilities that allow them to get closer by not taking damage, or to quickly come from an obscure angle. The longer-range heroes have abilities to get to the high ground to gain clear shots on their targets. In either case, the idea is to allow heroes to keep the damage on the enemy in more situations than other roles. This helps the damage role have more uniqueness when compared to other roles that deal the same amount of damage. The truth is, some tanks deal more damage than DPS. How does DPS then feel unique? Mobility and consistency of that damage. In the second case, movement abilities allow damage heroes to survive. They can avoid getting in the killing range of tanks or other damage heroes and allows for riskier plays. This gives them more time to keep outputting their damage that they're designed around. It's specifically because all heroes do damage that damage heroes need mobility to differentiate themselves in Overwatch. That is, in most cases. There are 5 damage heroes that lack good mobility: Bastion, McCree, Torb, Symmetra, and Mei. While these heroes lack mobility, their kits are given more damage under specific conditions. They may not be able to keep damage on from multiple angles, but when in play, they deal significant damage to the enemy consistently. Mei is an off case, as she doesn't deal damage consistently, but she does have easy access to control. An amusing observation is that these heroes often feel the worst to die to because of the community's response around control and/or turret damage. So, this is kind of funny, and so Torb, if we actually look at the damage, Torb's Mouse 1 is one of the worst damaging things in the game. He's on the bottom of the DPS chart. The funny thing is, if you add 52 damage to this, because that's what his turret does, he pops up to one of the better ones. Especially DPS with reload. He goes from 98 with a 52 damage second turret to 150, which would put him at rank 7. He would just be right behind Tracer with the extra damage from the turret. And then you look at Symmetra and Mei, and you think about this, and you're like, man, people hate Bastion. They hate getting stunned by McCree. They hate Torb and his turrets. They hate Sim and the turrets. They hate Mei, and another utility, but she has mobility, is Sombra. People hate damage heroes with utility. Like, it feels like it's the most annoying utilities you could ever give someone. A minor note to damage roll is the roll's balance is their hitbox. A damage hero's hitbox can range from the smallest body hitbox, Symmetra, to bigger than some tank hitboxes, Bastion, or Doomfist. I don't think he's bigger than some, but Bastion is definitely bigger than Sigma, I believe. Many factors can influence this, such as how the hero does damage, burst versus sustain, and how mobile the hero is. In all cases, the hitbox normally supports how the hero is supposed to be played and how damage is dealt. Of all the roles, damage hero size varies the greatest. So that's that part. So we went through each role in the Holy Trinity, how it does in other games, and how it does in Overwatch, right? I think this puts us at a pretty good spot to kind of start talking. Like, that's the pre-work. Now we can talk about Overwatch. Like, all right, so now we have some basis of information. What the hell? What the hell, Chro? Why am I still listening to you? I don't know. Where are we now? We've talked about how the roles work in Overwatch, so let's think about each of their balancing points and if we can modify them. So I kind of listed out, right, how each role gets their balance. Well, let's just say, fuck it, let's balance it. Let's do it and see what happens, and just think about it. Supports are primarily healing, utility, and damage. If we lower healing at all, then 2 supports won't be able to deal with an immense damage in Overwatch. AoE healers will always need burst healing abilities to go with their low AoE healing. While their numbers can't be modified, what we can modify is their uptime by introducing longer cooldowns or reload speeds. This would give windows of opportunity for players to leverage. So when we talk about healing, we can't just lower the numbers. People die too fast. We simply cannot lower the healing numbers anymore. But what we can do is, when I was talking about supports and tanks and how they operate on waves, right? Because like a support would be like, I use abilities, heal, and then I reload, and then all right, I'm back up healing again. What I'm saying is this dip, it's too short. That's my main thing. I think they have too much uptime, and then there's not enough window for people to take advantage of before they start doing max healing again. And then we look at utility. Utility is already on a cooldown and provides support with their playmaking ability. I think it would be unwise to modify this because a significant amount of hero uniqueness and impact comes from utility. I also think it would be a bad idea to give supports more control or disable. As a whole, the community is against massive amounts of stuns or slows. So we talk about, oh, alright, so if we can't mess with healing that much, we can a little bit, but not much. What about their utility? Well, 1, they get their uniqueness from it. 2, a significant amount of player impact for supports comes from utility. So I'm a little, wishy-washy about ever changing that too much. And then it's like, well, can we give them more utility? No, no one wants more heroes with stuns and slows. They don't. So we can't really add that to more supports, right? If every support had a stun, 2 or 3 supports have stuns. Sorry, I can't remember off the top of my head, but that's enough, right? That's enough. So where does that leave us? Well, that leaves us at damage. And while supports do less damage, it adds a significant difference when combined with the team. Ana is in the middle of DPS for supports at 88 DPS, which is 44% of an average hero's health. With 1 shot, right? That's significant. I consider it burst damage. As stated before, supports have better sustained DPS than burst, but overall their damage could still be considered burst. If we do want to target damage, then what we would have to make is that there's enough damage to defend themselves for a short period of time, but not enough to contribute too much to the team's DPS. So I think this is a butchered sentence. I apologize. But the idea is, if we lower the damage on supports, they become just targets. You just go after them and you kill them. If they use their utility, well, then you just kill them after that, right? Like, you jump in Ana. If she misses Sleep Dart, guess she's dead. Right, same thing with Moira. Well, you baited her fade out, now she's dead. It makes supports a little bit too weak for my likings, and I think that's how it's supposed to be by design. They're supposed to be able to fight with their primary fire. Even Mercy packs 100 DPS with her gun, which is also the largest projectile in the game. Oh, sorry. Sim's orb is bigger, but Mercy and Diva's gun is bigger than Junkrat's grenade. For people that don't know that. The projectile is... Junkrat's grenade is 0.2 meters. Mercy and Diva's gun is 0.25 meters in size. In radius, I should say. So what we'd have to do to supports is essentially allow them some damage, but essentially if they use it up, then they're kind of in a rough spot, rather than just them using an ability that's locked on a cooldown. The last change to Ana was a really good example of this. They lowered her shots from 14 to 12, which means she has to be a little bit more careful. Now, if they increased her reload speed to 2.5 seconds, all of a sudden, now Ana, when she starts using her shots on the enemy, and she has to reload, she can't heal her team for a longer time, and she was punished for not saving those shots to heal. And it just makes it more of a, she has to think about what she wants to do. It's not saying, oh, they shouldn't be able to do any damage at all, because they have to defend themselves. So just make it, don't make it have horrible consequences, but a little bit more consequential. So yeah, target reload time, clip sizes, projectile sizes, as in consistency, and falloff damage. What about tanks? Tanks are about model size, damage mitigation, effective range, conditional burst damage, and balance for competing demands. Tanks already get shredded with their large models and large HP pools, so I don't believe modifying model size will help the situation at all. And that means, like, I don't want to make tank sizes any bigger. I didn't really write... I guess I assumed I don't want to make them any smaller, because then you have to rebalance a lot of stuff that, like, is balanced against tanks, but not other things. To lower their damage mitigation would be sentence them to death, as there's always an amazing amount of damage that's happening at any moment, right? So this is the conundrum of tanks have to defend against 6 targets worth of damage, and if you make it any worse, they're just going to get obliterated. But what could we do with that? Could we make it last for a shorter period of time and lower the cooldown? So let's say we make Sigma's shield have 400 health, but it regens at like 100 HP a second, and then it's only down for like 2 seconds when you break it. So he's basically always using a 100, 200 health shield to block stuff constantly in different areas. Or you do the opposite. You give shields significant health, but don't allow them to regen for like half a minute. Like Reinhardt's, let's give him 300 shields, and let's say, fuck it, he can't regen it ever. It's only once a life. And both of those options, I'm just like, they both feel like crap. I don't like it. There's not a lot of counterplay. There's not a lot of interactions with them. It just doesn't feel nice. How do we want shields to interact in Overwatch? And what happens when players pick multiple shield heroes, right? These are questions we have to ask. If shields are too strong, they either feel unfun to shoot all the time and unfun to keep up all the time. Basically, when you're always holding a shield, it's not fun for anyone. It's just a necessity. That's why they try to keep it lower in duration. Like, oh, I've used the shield for a little bit. Okay, now I can punch people. Strong shields are also an issue because if a hero turns a corner and meets a tank hero, how will they deal with a shield designed to stop 6 heroes worth of damage? We could lower a tank's damage, but with their low range, a hero would walk through the shield and kill them with no threat of being killed. This is why tanks need to deal damage, right? If Reinhardt did 35 damage a swing, I would just walk through a shield and kill him every time. Remember that the key design to our tank is that they must be a threat in some fashion. We don't want to add more stuns or slows into the game, so damage is all that is left, right? We don't want to follow the mobile way of balancing heroes, which is our tank heroes, by giving them stuns and slows and stuff like that. Many players feel like Sigma deals too much damage, but he's one of the lowest DPSers in the game. So do we lower tanks' consistency and focus on their conditional burst damage? That could be something we could do. Tanks already have low range, so do we lower it even more? At what points do tanks feel powerless? Conditional damage is the tank mechanic that is the most fun and provides for the best experience, so it's best not to change it too much. But it is possible to change some of their damage towards that and away from consistency. So, basically, maybe we should make a conditional type of damage for Sigma, but we lower his damage a bit, right? We give him a situation where he can do a lot of damage. Like, maybe we make his damage all AoE, but lower it down to 50. So he's really good at conditional burst damage of AoE damage, but when he goes up against a single target, now it's not that strong. It feels like tanks are painted in a corner, so what do you start to take away without compromising the entire role? Tanks really are painted into a corner. There's very few things you can do with them globally to really change them that much. If you start doing anything to them, they start to fall apart like a Jenga tower. I think lowering their stuff, their mid-range damage a little bit, and giving them more conditional damage so they still feel strong under certain situations is the way forward, but I can't tell you how to do that. I can just talk about, like, philosophically. And now what about damage heroes? Well, damage heroes are about mobility, damage type and range, consistency, and utility. Mobility is what was what makes damage heroes viable. It keeps them alive, it provides a high skill ceiling, and allows for them to keep constant pressure on the enemy. While they need mobility balanced around cooldowns or other limiters, like Genji and Hanzo, they have mobility, but when they're near a wall. I don't believe it's possible to modify it too much. Damage heroes are dependent on mobility. That is it. That is the crux of damage heroes, and it's not a bad thing. It's really cool. They deal a little bit more damage than tanks and whatnot, but they have more ability to keep the pressure on you and for more angles. So it really is a unique way of looking at the damage class. And I don't think you can touch that at all. Because if you touch that, then they're just weak tanks. Damage type is an interesting concept because we can look at Apex Legends that requires a large map, so it makes all weapons a projectile type. This allows for longer firefights at long range, but quick burst damage at close range. This is really important because Overwatch, we have a lot of big maps, so the idea would be, if we want to use the whole map, then we can't have powerful hit scans. If you want to have a wide open map where visibility, you can see someone walking around the whole time, then you can't have such harsh punishments to that, or you have to just not design maps that way. Havana, Rialto, Junkertown. Our other balancing point would be that damage range would be damage range. But if damage heroes are too good from far away, then tank supports and other close range damage heroes feel helpless, and they will live behind cover playing a different game. And we've all felt that before. Not to mention, it's already difficult to dive longer range heroes without them using their mobility to get away and just live to shoot again. Consistency isn't a good balance point unless it's done in a way that's permanent. By this I mean that making something more difficult to shoot, like May's Icicle or Ana's Dart, only works long enough for the players to adapt to it. Making Ana's Dart slower would be a more permanent change in consistency, as enemies would be able to dodge it. So if we want to target consistency, do it. Make headshot boxes smaller. That would be a permanent way. Well, that even would be a permanent way because people would just get better. But it would lower consistency a little bit. And maybe for a little bit of time. And it is also one point to know, I didn't write this, but you can never play perfectly. You just can't. So it's not people could become robots and always hit their shot every time. So there is some meaning in if you lowered headshot hitboxes, it is slightly permanent, but also slightly not. Lastly, damage utility is a highly hated source of design in the role. This includes Sim and Torb, May with her wall and freezing, Sombra's hack, and McCree's stun. All of these are complained about by the community and feel crummy to die to. I don't think adding more of these abilities would be good in general for the game. So if we're like, oh, let's give damage heroes utility. Guys, we've tried that, and all the utility we've given them so far is hated. No one likes it. So what needs to be addressed? Well, we've done a lot of talking. We have. Understand that it's needed to get the community thinking in the right direction. So the purpose of this whole post is for people to start... It's for people to stop being dumbasses. I'll just say it. You fucking dumbasses. Stop doing that. We talked about it. We looked about, what we were basing stuff on, where it comes from other roles, taking references from other genres, and we should discuss this in a more educated manner than just be like, fuck Widow! Bitch shot me from 3/4 of the way across the map. I guess that 60-meter, fall-off didn't really save my ass there. We should talk alright, what do we do with Widow? Where's she strong? Where's she weak? What do we see with her in the future? This is why Jeff Plan says that he needs to understand the source of a player's frustration. Instead of telling him to nerf Echo, tell him how you have to play against an Echo and why that's an issue. This gives better insight into the source of the problem and not the symptom. So based on what we've discussed, the biggest takeaway is that we can't compare Overwatch to other genres like MMOs or MOBAs. What Blizzard is attempting here is to do something different than what anyone else has seen before. While it has some elements from other genres, it's still trying to be an FPS at its core. We can see this by the lack of damage abilities, meaning like easy ways to deal damage, higher emphasis on execution, and by far is the idea that all heroes deal damage. Basically, why we're stuck in this spot is because we're trying to be an FPS, which is what we want to be, so we have to understand how to solve our problem. And that we're willingly choosing the problem to solve it. The idea that everyone deals damage is so fundamental that the damage roll's unique aspect is not damage, but versatility with damage. That can't be understated. No game that I can ever think of is the damage class's ability, like unique ability, not damage. I can't think of a single one. It really is something unique to Overwatch. If someone can find me a game where they're like, oh yeah, here look, supports and tanks do as much damage as damage heroes here, and they do more, so there's actually no reason to have a damage class. This also means that the other ideas to fix an Overwatch, such as hero bans, will not work. I've discussed hero bans before, but we have to stop thinking that this is an issue hero bans could solve. Hero bans will only give the community the ability to deal with a problem quickly while Blizzard solves it. No single ban will ever change the game completely, and if it did, it would only cause the game to become another single way as a ban meta would form until balance patches. Look no further than MOBAs to see the same bans during month-long tournaments until a patch is released. It's treating the symptom, not the problem. So, chat thing, yeah, why Goats was able to be a thing. And I understand, like, people are like, oh, if we could have banned Brig, then Goats wouldn't have been a thing. I would hate to break it to you, no. That's not true. I understand that there may have been more options if Brig wasn't invented, but the truth is that people found out that tanks were fucking amazing, and if you just run at people, you can kill them. And if we look at MOBAs, while there are strong heroes and they do get banned consistently, you'll see it for the whole time. Like, bans actually doesn't fix the problem. It just means you have to ban this thing over and over and over again. And another reason why bans don't work, I don't talk about it here, but in MOBAs, bans disrupt the team's strategy because they can't swap their picks after they pick them. In Overwatch, you can. If I ban a hero, I go, okay, well, I just don't use the thing that thing's strong against or weak against, whatever the case may be. It doesn't solve the problem in the long term. In the short term, it's great. It allows the player base to have some effect in the game and allows us to play the way we feel the game should be played, which is important to have. But, and it's also a good way to show Blizzard, hey, we hate this thing, fix it, change it. Or we won't play it at all, ever. These are good tools, but to say that it will fix everything and it's some magic bullet, no, it's not. And don't treat it like it should. Bans have never been able to save a game. Well, I take that back. What was it? There's the one, Rambo 6 or whatever the game. They say bans did save it, but I think bans saved it after it was balanced. Basically, there's this one overpowered hero, and the only reason the game was good is because they banned the overpowered hero. Secondly, if a change has to be made, then more changes will have to follow. All of the current suggestions currently handicap one role so that another can feel better. This is what a lot of suggestions in the forums do. We need to think of balance as a whole, so what we take from one role must be reflected by changes in another. Damage isn't a mechanic we can modify on a couple heroes and have a balanced game. This would require a patch that changes every hero in the game and changes how heroes are designed from now on. So people that are like, you change these three things, game's perfect. No. What we're targeting is so fundamental that it's going to take massive changes. That being said, here's my main takes from looking at Overwatch from a more fundamental level. So these are the things that I just want to be like, here are the problems I see, and then later on we say how I would solve them, because we can disagree on how to solve some of these problems. So the first one is, the average DPS in Overwatch is 100 DPS. This means 600 DPS at any time from a team of 6 players. This does not include headshots or damage amplification. Stop complaining about Zenyatta and Echo shredding tanks, when no tank in the game can live from 6 sources of body shot damage for a second. We need to face the facts that all heroes in Overwatch deal burst damage, as the lowest DPS in the game still kills a DPS hero in 4 seconds. This damage is why shields, damage mitigation, and healing have to be so extreme. There's no other ways to put it, boys. This is the biggest problem in Overwatch. We're like, oh, but but we lowered Echo's damage by 5. Okay. I guess we're at 595 DPS. Wow, those tanks are sure going to live a lot longer now, right? Headshots are a big problem, and the fact that everyone can just whoop everyone else's ass at any point in time. While it doesn't, at lower ranks, it's less noticeable. At higher ranks, when focus fire happens, the target dies. It doesn't matter what the target is in Overwatch, it dies. 2. Heroes designed and balanced around consistency have slowly drifted out of scope from what they were originally designed for. This is because of player skill, and the primary reason burst damage that is normally inconsistent has become consistent. To keep hero design in scope, balance changes must be made when the community has gained enough skill. That's it. There's a reason why burst damage is consistent damage now. Skill. The concept of counters and buffing counters to deal with problematic heroes does more to stop players from playing the game than allowing others to play. This is because someone on one team has to initially switch, and then that hero that's countered has to switch as well. Now, neither team can do what they wanted to. Sure, player impact was immediately high, but at what point do players get to play the game? So the whole concept of counters, I just don't like, because it's like, oh, you wanted to play A? Well, I'm going to pick B now, you can't play A. Oh, you swapped off of A and you picked C? I guess I can't play B now. Fuck, why are we both playing a game a way that we can't play it? 4. Damage mitigation from tanks is so strong that most DPS can't stand against a tank in 1v1. If a DPS is within the effective range of a tank, they need to immediately leave or die. There needs to be more of an ebb and flow here that allows for more interactions instead of feast or famine. I think that's pretty straightforward. Shielding needs to be broken up into personal and team-based shielding, much like healing is with supports. Most supports heal themselves slower or are dependent on cooldowns. Shielding needs to imitate this model somehow. So, supports. If you know it or not, supports heal themselves slower. That means Brig heals herself a little bit slower. Lucio definitely heals himself slower than the people around him. Baptiste, he has to use an ability. Ana has to use an ability. Zen, shields. Moira, attack people, and an ability. I forgot the last support, but I guarantee it's locked behind an ability. Oh, Mercy. She can't take damage and it's slower. So, understand that self-healing for supports is lower than normal. And it's designed that way. If we can somehow emulate that to shields, I think we would have an answer. That is one of the things that could maybe solve Overwatch's problems. Nearly all damage heroes are based on mobility, and snipers shut this mobility down. The damage roll will never have variance in it if it has the sniper archetype. This is compounded that 90% of a map is unusable because snipers are dominant. By opening up more of the map, players will find more ways to fight that suits different heroes and allowing different strategies to be used. Fighting heat maps with and without snipers would be interesting to see, but only Blizzard can provide these. So a lot of people are upset that there's not a lot of it's not viability. There's not a lot of different scenarios in Overwatch. And I believe a lot of those are caused because you can't use the whole map because snipers are so strong. Essentially, if you could guarantee a way for me to play the same point 3 different ways, I can create 3 different situations now. And with different hero picks, each of those 3 situations could have multitudes of ways of playing them. Now we have a lot of variety in the game. But when you have a sniper that puts down 2 out of the 3 flanks not usable, all of a sudden now we're stuck on one area, and now we do have some heroes, but only some now are viable, and it just loses a lot of versatility and variations. Heroes with no clear balance for competing demands have the most issues. Sigma has some of the lowest DPS in Overwatch, but is widely perceived that he deals too much damage. This is because there's not much a hero can do when he puts up a shield and dies in 2 volleys. In the support category, we see the similar issue with Baptiste. The easiest way to notice these heroes is that they will seem to be over-kitted. I think that's fairly straightforward. We've seen a lot of over-kittedness in the recent heroes. Support damage is high in burst while still being able to heal. There needs to be more of a trade-off for being able to do both. And to make this perfectly clear, I'm not saying remove heroes, support heroes from being able to do both, just a slightly higher cost than currently. A good example of this is Ana getting a smaller clip size in August. With fewer shots, she now has a harder time of balancing on who to shoot. So I remember I said supports work in waves, right? Oh, I'm healing. Okay, I gotta reload. Okay, now I'm doing stuff again. Bam. Or I gotta wait for an ability cooldown. That's my downtime. What I'm saying is there's not enough downtime, and as we create more downtime, well, now we can have some more uptime. And if we can link that downtime and the uptime to be offense versus defense, like, oh, I tried to shoot more, and because of that, I had to reload more. So my team now, like, okay, now my team is less healing. Right now, it's just like, I shoot whatever the hell is in front of me. If it's an ally, it's an ally. If it's an enemy, it's an enemy. I'm just going to heal and damage everyone all at the same time, more or less. So, I think if supports had more of a challenge to pick between offense and defense instead of a very clear cut, oh, this is what you do, and this is what you don't do. But again, I'm not saying trying to get rid of all of it, and I think that's what some people are going to take this as. They're going to be like, well, they need to do damage. I'm like, no, I'm saying do damage, just maybe lower Ana's clip size to 10. Maybe make her reload 2 seconds instead of 1.5. Like very, very small, like just minor adjustments. And this next point, I'm so happy this patch happened today. So for those that are watching on YouTube, today's patch was where they changed Reaper to do less damage, but from farther away. For whatever reason, anti-tank heroes still exist after role queue was created. Anti-tank heroes were there as a mechanic to pick in case a team was tank heavy. Well, that didn't work. Anti-tank heroes didn't stop goats. It still drives the question. If you're required to have 2 tanks because of role queue, why design a hero to excel at crushing them? Designing a close-range hero is one thing, but designing a hero to specifically kill tanks is another. This, I think, is Reaper's problem right now, is that he's just meant to be a tank killer. Why would I only want to kill tanks when I can pick a hero that can kill anything? Really, like, Ashe doesn't really kill tanks too much slower than a Reaper. Obviously, Reaper has some other advantages, but nothing of that outweighs being able to kill everyone all the time. I really think there needs to, like, the concept of anti-something hero needs to go away, and heroes just need to be created. This is the Dota way of making heroes. They don't make a hero and be like, this hero is going to be a hard support, and it goes in the jungle, and this is all it can do. They just make a hero, it has some themes, and whatever it does, and they just let it grow naturally. League is the ones, I call them gaming parents, they're not game developers. They say, oh, I'm going to create this hero. Here's scaling on your spells, so this hero is good at this point in time, but not this point. And you have to play it that way, because that's my game, and you play the game my way. The Dota approach is much better, where it's just a lot more open-ended, a lot more freedom, a lot more creativity, and that basically was what I'm saying here, needs to be added into Overwatch. The 10th thing. Tanks and support timing are currently seen as waves. We talked that a bit. But not equal up and downtime. Currently, their downtime is significantly less than their uptime. If we take Ana, for instance, Ana can shoot, I think, for like 12 seconds, or 10 seconds. And then she reloads for 1.5 seconds. I'm not saying make 10 seconds up and 10 second downtime, but a 2.5 second reload time wouldn't be bad. This causes constant action, which at first felt like good game design, but now feels like a chore. This is an interesting thing I thought about. Basically, constant action when you're designing a game sounds good, but if there's constant action, it actually becomes more of a chore after a while. It's good to have some downtime. And I look at games like, well, pretty much anything, and there's downtime. Like, there's downtime in StarCraft 2, there's downtime in Dota. There's downtime in a lot of these professional games where, like, they can focus on something else, and it's not just attack. Apex Legends, thank you. Thank you, Guts McButts. Yeah, so, like, downtime is fine. And I think Overwatch, at least when played at a higher level, it's just constant going on, and then one team just kills. At the lower levels, yeah, like they go, bleh, one team wins and then you wait for a bit. That's not the downtime I want. What I want is downtime is when things start fighting, it kind of ebbs and flows. Ebbs and flows, ebbs and flows. During combat. I don't want to just smack and just kill. While downtime seems boring, it opens up more windows of opportunity for players to exploit. This is how we can make the damage roll mechanic of looking for ways to deal constant damage be significantly different than tank and support design. So while supports and tanks do this, we make damage just do this. So damage is the one that's constantly on, trying to find poke and prod for openings and trying to do that. And now it's like a game where like tanks and supports are trying to like make their waves align, while damage heroes are trying to put damage out to screw up the timings of the tanks and the supports. And I think that would be a really cool way to design the game. Jeff and Joff want faster fights? If you can provide me some context for that and a source, I would be quite happy. Map design needs more diversity and start to support fully closed-in flanks. Currently, every flank gives a window of opportunity so the enemy can see they're coming ahead of time, which allows the team to reposition. If you look at every single map design, there is no flank that doesn't have an opening before they get to where the enemy would normally be at. If you look at any control map, there's always going to be an opening before you get to the point, like, essentially Nepal, like, there's always going to be, like, a small little window, and you can see someone flank that side, and then they're going to get to the point where they can actually damage you. What I'm saying is make it all solid, so you don't know. And this is because of number 12. Deception and surprise is a mechanic that allows a game to self-regulate its metas. Overwatch has neither of these. Point 11 highlights that even map design tries to remove any surprise or deception. Risky strategies or cheese is required to keep greedier tactics in check. Without either, the game becomes too straightforward as your entire hand is revealed as soon as your hero picks are shown. While simplicity helps players understand and play the game in the long run, it hurts meta diversity and leads to stagnation. Heroes need to be versatile enough to execute multiple strategy plans at any given time. Yeah. So I think there's no deception or surprise mechanic in Overwatch. There's very little. There's none. In StarCraft 2 or any RTS, like there's cheese strategies, there's stuff that can just win the game, and while people hate it, it's there to punish greedy plays. Like it's needed to have variance. Overwatch has very little variance, and it's because it is simple, which is good and bad. So how to go about addressing the above concerns, and I actually call this out. This is my least favorite part of design, as the above issues can be fixed in multiple ways. You may agree that with the above issues, but heavily disagree on how I would fix them, which is why I've broken it out and addressed it separately. And I say, like, to address points 1, 2, and 6, I would reduce headshot multipliers to 1.5 across the board. Players have gotten skilled enough where the rarity of headshots is now common. This will require a rework of those heroes dependent on headshots, mainly snipers. Supports deal a bit of burst damage, and while that's needed for some self-defense, they should have more consequences when forced into direct combat. Increasing reload times and having smaller clips would be a good place to start. This wouldn't stop them from burst healing and making plays, but it would create more openings for players to exploit. In other cases, such as Zenyatta, I would rather hit his consistency and lowers projectile size to 0.1 meter, which is Torb's primary size, down from 0.15. This would mimic the tank concept for competing demands. It's good for support to be able to attack and support, but not at the same time. Basically, I just want a little bit more. If damaged heroes get on top of a support and they pressure them, that pressure should be a little bit more strong than it is currently. It doesn't need to kill them, but basically they need to waste more resources, and that should have a bigger effect on the game than it currently does. DPS needs more self-sufficient mechanic that allows them to trade damage more efficiently and have less reliance on supports. I believe all damage rolls should have half the health converted into shields. This would promote flanking and taking fights outside of the death ball by giving the damage roll more strategies to use. It will also increase the variety seen in the game. It will also address the dynamic between tanks and damage, as damage heroes can briefly fight a tank before backing off to attack again. This will force teams to separate more, which will allow for more experiences. I say these 2 points are difficult to take on as this seems out there, but I believe so. This is about shields being able to. It's about shields mimicking supports, how they heal themselves less, rather than how much they heal the team members. And so this idea is a little bit out there, but if a shield could take reduced damage from multiple sources, but extra damage from a single source, it would greatly change how tanks and DPS interact. Instead of an all or nothing, the tank's resource would be quickly reduced because they had to use up their ability purely for themselves. So if I attack a Sigma one-on-one and he uses his shield, I damage it more. This punishes him for using that ability just for himself. But in larger fights, it would combat spam and give tanks more of an ability to block damage all the way to the point without needing a shield that has massive hit points. So instead of giving Reinhardt a 3,000 hit point shield, we can say, hey, every damage source after the first does half damage against the shield. That way, he can block all the way to the point, and then it breaks because, it just basically allows multiple heroes to hit a single shield and not just destroy it instantly and kill everyone. The trick is how to visually display this and how to make it seem natural. This is an attempt to mimic how supports that use utility for themselves put their teams at greater risks. While unpopular, to better support greater map diversity, to allow more damage rolls to be played, and to allow lower the overall damage in Overwatch, snipers need to be reworked. My suggestion into rework is to a scout-type hero. While providing longer-range damage but not lethal, they also provide utility-based on information gathering. So essentially, it's a utility-based damage hero that's utility is information gathering. That's what I think needs to happen to snipers. For the reasons I provided. I call it these points. It's hard to give suggestions because they are design issues with no clear fix. It's something to know going forward and to attempt to avoid with new heroes. And so this is like over-kitting a hero, stuff like that. And this is my favorite part of the whole blog post. There's still one other option we have that a lot of players aren't seeing. Say fuck it and let everyone deal mass amounts of damage. It has worked until now, and it seems once Overwatch 2 comes out, it'll generate revenue for another 3 to 5 years by following the same model. Overall, the current balance model isn't terrible. With any hero, you can get to the top 100 if you're good enough. It's when you get to these higher levels where the design choices really start to show as skill ceilings are hit and design hard locks out some options. I know it sounds odd to propose the opposite of what I've spent a lot of time writing and looking into. Know that looking deep into one game will give you insight into another. Personally, my goal isn't to change Overwatch, but it's a selfish goal to help myself understand this game and other games better. By understanding the issues we see in Overwatch, we can identify issues in other games easier, or in some cases identify an issue and consider it to be a feature. In either case, the exercise around this discussion is probably more valuable than the discussion itself. There we go. It only took like an hour and a half. Questions? From the July 30th AMA, here's Geoff's quote. Interesting, on our list of experiments is to try to make the game significantly more lethal than it is right now. I'm not sure how it will play out, even we haven't tried it yet, but the goal would be to allow for more carry potential, as a great player would be able to more easily 1v2 or 1v3 enemies. Again, this would be an experiment. Oh yeah, I remember that one now. Luna also adds a quote. All of this isn't to say we couldn't try to make changes to lower damage across the board somewhat, but we'd have to be very careful not to push it too far, as the game really does feel and play a lot worse when the lethality drops too low. I don't think it does. I think if the lethality dropped a little bit more, I'm not saying like make people live forever, but if the lethality dropped by like 15%, I think would be good. But yeah, now I remember that quote where they're like, well, we could make everyone just carry like crazy. That already is the case, Red. In fact, why they wouldn't allow all heroes to carry is because heroes like Sim, Mei, Junkrat, Pharah would have the ability to dominate a game. And no one wants that. I can actually tell you right now, 100%, if they made all damage heroes be able to carry, people would fucking hate it. Because if Junkrat does more damage, everyone would cry. They would. It doesn't matter. If people didn't like a hero, they would cry about it. But you look at heroes like Widow, Ashe, Echo, Tracer. All these heroes that can carry the game are already in the game. And they can do 1v3s. So it's funny. The heroes that, are allowed to be good do have that lethality. So I don't see the game getting more lethal because they would have to make the heroes people hate more lethal. What do you think about Paladins? Lower mobility, less damage, especially with supports. 1.5 headshot. Oh, they have 1.5 headshot? Okay. I need to play Paladins to really get a grasp on it. Right now, I've never played it. I've seen it, but that's about it. I feel like isn't a lot of it in third person. Doc Burt, it's 2 in the morning. I have to sleep now. Well, thank you for stopping. Thanks for sticking around for the whole time. I appreciate it. Good night, Doc Burt. Get some good rest. Only on mounts when respawning. Okay. Reposting was wondering if Overwatch could handle jungle regions where anyone more than 15 days can't see player models. So in Sorcerer, what that would go under would be where I say there needs to be more deception in Overwatch. And one of the things that I don't like is that, one, projectiles glow bright red so they can be seen, and two, there's always the red outline of the enemy. I really don't like that. I understand that's there for people to not be like, to understand what they're attacking and for simplicity and for accessibility. I understand that's why it's doing that, but I would really like those removed so you can be sneakier. You tried playing Paladins for the first time and ended up playing against bots. WTF, mate. Paladins is versus bots until level 5. Okay, that's how they onboard you. Can't speak for anything else, but I think the biggest thing that sticks in my craw, if you have one of those, when it comes to the game, is that it was released with the mindset that players weren't Twitch gods, could compete in suffer heroes and skill kits. Since then, we've added comp and a pro league, and the development has gone towards we are now a hard FPS low skilled players need not apply. Red, if you actually look at my first post ever, and at the top of this post, I link it. This accessibility thing right here, this previous post, if you want to read this, I posted this November 4th, 2017, and I call out why Overwatch is like this, and actually, like, it's an FPS genre that's accessible to everyone, and it's an attack on skill. Basically, at the lower ranks, you're correct. The game is for everyone. It does allow people to play that aren't, Twitch gods, as you stated, to play the game. That's why Mercy exists. That's why all these heroes exist. That's why tanks and supports are a lot less FPS mechanic and more decision-based. Right? It makes sense to say, hey, people coming in from non-FPS games don't want to play an FPS. Or maybe they do, but they're not familiar with it. So these people that don't play the game for shooting people in the face, let's make those characters more dependent on decisions and abilities. Tanks and supports. So it's not gone super hardcore. We're a hardcore FPS. Ooh, look at us. We're a hardcore bunch. It's not like that at all. Now at the top levels, maybe so, but that's what the top levels are about. But for anything under GM, what you say is still holds true. I understand if you took it to its maximum, it wouldn't, but you're a bad player, so you can't take it to the maximum. I apologize for saying that, but that's how it is. But accessibility is, like, again, it's the biggest thing in Overwatch. It's the most important thing. That is the one thing that probably drives balance and design more than anything else. And that's why I was so adamant on talking about it at first. Also, Doctor said this was very interesting. Well, thank you, sir. Well, guys, if that's it, I actually do need to end stream. I would appreciate it if people, link this to other places and they talked about it. Basically, I'll post this on Twitter and, my Discord and stuff like that. But It's the whole self-promotion thing. I try not to self-promote and try to do super cocky things like that. And I think word of mouth really does mean a lot more than just me going around and saying everyone, hey, look, read my shit. And because no one wants to read this. No one, when I put this on YouTube again, no one gives a fuck. No one's going to watch an hour and a half of this stuff. But I really appreciate people's, sticking around for it. My viewership basically stayed the same the whole time. And this experience or this exercise was actually really insightful to me as as I like to study game development, and I'm just kind of sharing it with you. And I'd like to hear what you guys say and think. And again, you can join my Discord and you can hit me up on the feedback channel, or you can just start discussing stuff in any of the Discord channels. So I appreciate that.